We are in a climate where the Europeans have done a lot of anthropological studies of other people. They studied American Indians, they studied the Africans, our ancestors, they studied tribes lost somewhere in Australia, but no one has actually sat down and studied the European. No one has gone into looking at the European from an anthropological standard, how they really are, where they really came from. What is the nature of this person? What is the nature of this tribe, this clan, this family? So what I'm going to do is give you a background into nutritional causes of what we call today racism.
Dr. Liaila of Afrika opens his lecture on white racism and mental illness by highlighting a critical point. Europeans have traveled across the globe, conquering, colonizing, and studying the world's people. Yet no serious studies have been conducted on Europeans themselves. He challenges his audience to consider the fact that African people and other oppressed groups do not truly understand the nature, psychology, and history of Europeans, the very group that has subjugated them for centuries. Dr. Afrika stresses that this lack of study prevents oppressed people from fully understanding their enemy and therefore limits their ability to effectively resist systems of domination. He then transitions into discussing how racism, imposed and perpetuated by Europeans, has detrimental effects on the nutrition and health of black people. He asks the question, where did Europeans come from and how does their origin shape their behavior? According to Dr. Afrika, Europeans emerged approximately 4,000 years ago. The introduction into history, he notes, was characterized by violence, a pattern that continues in their collective behavior. Because the European environment was harsh and its soil nutrient deficient compared to the rich lands of Africa, Dr. Afrika suggests that Europeans developed behaviors shaped by scarcity, aggression, and survival in nutrient-poor conditions.
Now, the Europeans came from somewhere, first of all. They claim they walked from Asia all the way up to Europe, and they established their civilization in Europe. They took a 4,000-mile walk from Asia up to Europe. That is their claim. And they claim their race is from 3 Sanskrit words. That is their claim. But the only thing we have historically to document them is what the facts are. There are a lot of people who claim that they were made and created in a laboratory, the Europeans. There are a lot of people who claim they are a degenerate black person, someone who suffers from a melanin deficiency. That is true. But the facts are they came from somewhere. So we can look at where they came from and what caused them to behave the way they behave, strictly as a science, like you look at any other animal. There are human beings that behave like animals, and then there are animals that behave like human beings. So we're going to look at some animals that behave like human beings. Now, according to, let me go to the chalkboard for a minute. Now, we're going back to maybe 1.5 million years ago. And during that period of time, they had what they call the Ice Age. And that was about from 1.5 million years ago.
May I have your attention, please? Workshop, sir.
I'll let him pause there.
Dealing with abusive relationships. Room 102. The challenges of international interracial relationships is in room.
Yes, so we know that the Ice Age started, the most recent one started 1.5 million years ago, and it just stopped about 10,000 years ago. That's when it stopped 10,000 years ago. And the ice receded about 5,000 years ago. And the Europeans entered into history 4,000 years ago. This is when they first recorded this race called the Europeans 4,000 years ago. That was recorded on a pallet, on a mace head in Africa when they first met the Europeans. That's 4,000 years ago. So this is when they entered history. And of course, they entered history violently. And we say they were violent people. Well, they came from the Ice Age. Now, we're in Europe. We're around France, Germany, Sweden, the Slavic countries. Those areas are known as glaciated. Glaciated soil, when the ice melts, the ice floods the area, and when it floods, it washes away all the vital nutrients. This is what happened. So I'm going to just outline some of them and go over some of them that were washed away from the soil. Selenium. Anyone raised on Ice Age glaciated soil, that's in France, that's in Germany, that's in England, is going to have a selenium deficiency. This is fact. This is what the soil content is. They're going to have a zinc deficiency. They're also going to have a phosphate deficiency. Or phosphorus, excuse me. That's just some of the deficiencies, just from eating plants that are raised on this glaciated soil in Britain, in France, in Sweden, in the European countries. So they're raised on soil that is depleted of these nutrients. When you have a selenium deficiency, you become irritable very easily. Your mind becomes unstable. When you have a zinc deficiency, you lack a neural, it's an element used to transmit nerve messages. So your nerve messages are not transported balancedly, you see, just by having a zinc deficiency. Then when you have a phosphate and potassium deficiency, by the way, this is the soil that raised the plants that they were eating. It was deficient in these nutrients. And when you look up these nutrients in a textbook, you'll find that a person that lacks them is violent, very easily irritated, and suffers from what they call schizophrenia, which is a mind and mood disorder. So the Europeans are raised on what we call glaciated soil. So they are deficient in these nutrients from 5, 4, 10,000 years ago. So they continuously were eating plants that were deficient of these nutrients. And when you're deficient of certain nutrients, each nutrient controls a form of behavior. If I take away your selenium, you will become sterile. Because selenium is highest in concentration in the male system where the testicles is, in the sperm, selenium. So is zinc. That's why long ago they told brothers to eat oysters. They were after the zinc, you see. And that's the highest concentration is in the sperm. The highest concentration of vitamin C is around the semen. That's 8 to 10 times higher than the vitamin C that's in the systemic floating blood system. So these vital nutrients were not in the soil of the Europeans. Therefore, nutritionally, their behavior could only be one of unstable personality, violence, aggression, easily irritated, and then, added on to this deficient soil, we have a pineal gland. I'm going to go to the board again. The pineal gland, that's the one that makes melanin. And when you're deficient, their pineal gland is 60 to 80% non-functional, whereas African people have 100% functional pineal gland. Pineal gland is a gland that is in the center of your brain, and it makes the brain cell for all the cells in the body. It is the master gland. Without it, nothing happens. Nothing. All they tell us is that the pineal gland makes black. But they do not tell you that without the pineal gland, there's no nucleus to any cell in your body. If your pineal gland is very active and stimulated, you can make yourself darker. The Europeans have used experiments where they put themselves in a glass bubble and just stimulated the pineal gland without the sun and became darker. Because they stimulated the pineal gland to make the melanocyte stimulating hormone. So they are deficient in melanin, you see. And without the melanin, you have no balance. You lack spirituality, you see. So we have three major things. We have the melanin deficiency. This is anatomically. I'm not going into social science. We all know about prejudice and all that sort of thing, but we tend to not look at the animal that behaves like a human being. So we have the mineral deficiency, the selenium, the zinc, the phosphorus, potassium, and we have the melanin deficiency. All of this is coming out of the Ice Age, where the soil was depleted of these nutrients. So we have a melanin deficiency. When you have a melanin deficiency, you have something that's called obsessive compulsive behavior. I hope you can understand my writing. A melanin deficiency produces obsessive compulsive behavior. This behavior is the behavior of what you would call an addictive person, someone that has to do things step by step. Because when you hide melanin, you are creative, you're more intuitive. So you create your own steps. But when you're deficient in melanin, you have to go step by step by step. And that's called addictive behavior. If I were to teach someone with a melanin deficiency how to dance, I better paint the steps by step on the floor. That is because they're coming out of a melanin deficiency. And that's obsessive compulsive behavior, which you call racism. So, obsessive compulsive people are inherently inferior. Now, all I've spoken to you about is what is nutritionally going on with the person that we call the Europeans, the Caucasians. What we have been going on in our plight with them is dealing with them socially and say they do this socially and they do this socially and we don't like this, so we protest and we march and all that sort of thing. But we have not, as I said earlier, looked at them as strictly as they look at another group of people. They go in, they take the scientists, and they examine a group of people and they call it anthropology. Now we're going in and we're taking the science of our mind, because the mind means science, to know, and we're looking at them. They come from a glaciated area, selenium deficiency, zinc deficiency, phosphorus deficiency, potassium deficiency. They also come from a melanin deficiency. And what does all of this produce? I repeat, unstable thinking, easily irritated, aggressive behavior, distorts reality. Distortion of reality is known as a psychosis. If I show you the pyramids in Africa and you say black people are dumb, then you are distorting reality. The thing with a mind that's in this kind of state, in this diseased state, is that it believes first and then it sees. You are used to thinking seeing is believing. If you see the truth, if I show you the pyramids, and I say it sits in the direct center of the landmass, and I say a star passes over it every 50,000 years, and then I show you the calculus in the building, and the geometry in the building, and then I show you the space age, which was invented in Africa when they did astrology, as you call it. That was the opening of the space age. I show you all this evidence, and you say African people are inferior, then you are suffering from a selenium deficiency, a zinc deficiency, a phosphorus deficiency, and a melanin deficiency, because you have distorted reality to inferiority. A group of people who are inferior use their imagination and create an illusion that they are superior. There is nothing in recorded history to document that the Caucasians are superior.